Don't you want to analyze or guide your friends, children, employees, or managers much better? How do our expectations affect the other person? Let's take a look at the story of Clever Hans, and then take a quick look at one of the most cited and debated studies in the history of psychology. Attention, this video can change your life. Many people believe that pets or children have unusual intelligence, or can understand anything they say. Some people have unusual stories on this subject. One of these anomalous stories is that of a man in the late 19th century who claimed that his horse had extraordinary intelligence and that he had evidence for it. William von Osen. He was a teacher and horse trainer. He believed that animals could learn to read or count. To prove this, von Osen studied dogs and bears, but his first attempts were unsuccessful. But when he started working with an unusual horse, he changed our understanding of psychology. Also known as Clever Hans, the animal could answer questions with 90% accuracy when its hoof was touched. He could do 4 operations and tell the time and date. Crowds flocked to see the horse, and the subject soon caught the attention of the scientific community. Researchers conducted studies on horses and looked for signs of deception, but none of them found any evidence. The horse could answer questions posed by anyone, even without von Osen. For a while, the world believed that the horse was really intelligent. Then psychologist Oscar Fungst began to study Zeke Hans, establishing a research team and identifying 2 anomalies. When it blinked or was behind a curtain, the horse could not answer questions. Similarly, he could only answer if the questioner knew the answer. After these observations, Fungst concluded that Clever Hans did not do mental calculations. He didn't understand speech or numbers with human logic. Yes, von Osen had no intention of deceiving people, but his claims about his horse were also unfounded. So how did Clever Hans answer even the most difficult questions? First of all, let's do justice to this incredible feature of Hans. It is an undeniable fact that he is a talented horse. However, the most important thing for us is the trace left by this story in the world of psychology. Clever Hans had learned to catch nonverbal cues by detecting the subtle movements of people. When someone asked a question, Clever Hans, he was responsive to body language with such precision that many poker players would envy. For example, when someone asked the horse to do a calculation, it would start touching its hooves. Once he got the correct answer, he would show involuntary signs asking the question. Fungst found that many people had their heads down at this point. Clever Hans recognized his behavior and stopped. When he winked or the questioner didn't know the answer, the horse didn't have any clues and couldn't answer when he couldn't see the clues. Von Osen died in 1909 and Clever Hans fell from the records. But his legacy lives on in psychology. In the years that followed, working psychologists began to study how the expectations of others affected us. If intelligent Hans could somehow be made to know by creating an expectation that he would answer the question, could the same be true for humans? Decades of research have found consistent and solid evidence that the answer is yes. Self-fulfilling prophecy. That is, the situation where something turns out as expected just because it was expected, better known as the Pygmalion effect. Now, before we talk about the details of this situation, let's take a brief look at where the name comes from. Next, we'll look at some very interesting research that proves this. According to a legend in mythology, a sculptor named Pygmalion decides to sculpt the woman of his dreams one day. This statue of a woman carved from ivory, which he made with a long patience and devotion, will be so beautiful when finished that it is rumored that no living woman can be as beautiful as this statue. Pygmalion, on the other hand, realizes that he is in love with the statue he has made, and because it is lifeless, he begins to suffer from deep love and makes vows. According to the legend, Aphrodite accepts Pygmalion's vow and fulfills her wish, and the statue is now alive. Thus, the sculptor immediately marries the woman of his dreams, and they live happily ever after. The phenomenon of Pygmalion effect, or self-fulfilling prophecy, named after this mythological story, can be explained as a person's behavior towards the expectations of others about him after a while. This effect actually tells us that the more we want and expect something, the more likely it is to happen. This process comes into play when we develop expectations about how people around us should be and how they should behave. Our intimacy with new acquaintances is related to whether we think they are distant and cold or friendly and warm. Generally, we act distant to people we do not find sincere, in line with our expectations. As a result, they also resent our coldness and respond accordingly. Thus, our expectation about them becomes self-validated, even though it is basically shaped by our own behavior. Madrone, 2004. A person who thinks that he is not respected in the workplace, although there is no such thing in reality, perceives almost every behavior of his colleagues as hostile, sensitive, and skeptical. Because of this perception, when this is the case, the perception not only gives it to the outside, but also makes the person not respected by the people around him after a while, with the energy it spreads. As a result, it is equivalent to telling a schizophrenic patient, "You are a schizophrenic. You cannot get better for life," while the prophecy comes true, and that patient continues to act like a schizophrenic for life. After Merton's studies, Rosenthal and Jacobson's 1968 study called Pygmalion in the Classroom, in which they examined the Pygmalion effect in the classroom environment, attracted a lot of attention. A study was conducted on students. In this study, students are given a general aptitude test. In fact, there is a situation where both students and teachers are put to the test and analyzed. Teachers are given a list of students who make the top 20% of the test results. But this list is not an accurate reflection of student success. A completely random selection was made, and this situation was hidden from the teachers. In other words, teachers think that some students have high IQs, even though they are not actually highly intelligent. At the end of the term, the test applied at the beginning was applied again to the same students, according to the analyses made at the end of the application. It was determined that the children who were told to the teachers that they were at a good level in terms of mental development showed a remarkable level of mental development. According to Rosenthal and Jacobson, 1968, this difference stems entirely from the expectations created in the minds of teachers. Rosenthal's conclusions regarding the reasons why children who are claimed to have giftedness, potential, and who are not different from others are much more successful at the end of the experiment are as follows. Teachers inevitably behaved more patiently and warmly to students who were told that they would develop better. In line with the positive expectations they had developed, they conveyed their expectations to them through tone of voice, facial expression, and similar ways. And again, the teachers were more constructive when giving feedback to these students about their mistakes, and they were doing it completely unconsciously. This situation positively affected the students' self-perceptions and motivated them to work more. Here, how and when teachers say what they want to say. Their posture, body language, and even their touch may have reflected that they expect high performance from them. In the experiment in question, there was no difference between the time teachers spent with students, but there was a change in the quality of the relationships. These results are an answer to the question of how high expectations can lead to high performance, and as a result, the prophecy, if you show a child that you believe he will be successful, the probability of success will increase, has been made, and the Pygmalion effect has been fully realized. It was concluded that expectations affect success or performance. In fact, you can see examples of this in business life. For example, managers involuntarily place greater responsibilities on someone they consider to be of much higher potential. He raises his expectations on that person. In fact, in a way, it motivates that person because of the expectations that the manager creates in his own mind. Acts more constructively while giving feedback on his mistakes. And this increases the opportunities for that employee to improve himself. So a kind of positive feedback loop is formed. However, if expectations are low, on the contrary, a negative feedback loop occurs and leads to a decrease in that person's performance. In other words, determining the direction of the cycle with your expectations will affect whether your results will be positive or negative. Last sentence. It is an undeniable fact that our expectations shape the person in front of us. However, it is worth paying attention to the following: to be in dose and balanced, because having extremely high expectations on people that will exceed their capacity puts that person under stress, and has the opposite effect. As in all areas of life, it is important to maintain balance here. Well, when we have expectations on others, we can affect their performance. Okay, we get it. But what about our expectations on ourselves? It doesn't matter. ourselves or others. Beliefs, our behavior affects our performance. As Henry Ford said, think whether you can do it or not. In both cases, you are right.